Well, for those of you who were here last Sunday, you may remember that the theme of our service was finding rest and renewal. And during coffee hour, we also celebrated the 99th birthday of one of our churchgoers, Pauline Zancanero. And Pauline taught me an Italian phrase that fits the theme of last Sunday's service. And that Italian phrase, I hope I get it right, Mark, is nulla intenzionale. Nulla intenzionale. And what it means is intentional nothingness or purposeful nothingness. And I love that because that's exactly what we were talking about last Sunday. To intentionally, to purposely take time out, take a break from the busyness of our lives and just do absolutely nothing and do it with great joy. That's what it means to truly honor the Sabbath. Well, today I'm going to give you another Italian word, and that Italian word is abbondanza. You may remember it a few years ago from an Olive Garden commercial. Abbondanza means abundance. And I used to hear that word quite often on Sunday afternoons growing up in New York City. Some of you know that my father worked in an Italian deli in Queens, and we lived in a small apartment above the deli. And most Sundays we would have everyone in the family over, aunts, uncles, cousins. We would all gather in that small apartment for a feast. And my grandmother would often say, abbondanza, abundance, because there was always so much food, so much so that everybody went home with leftovers. Now, growing up as a boy, I thought my family was rich. I really did. It wasn't until I got into high school and I started to make new friends, and they would invite me out to their family's summer houses in the Hamptons. And I began to think we weren't so rich after all. And looking back, I am sorry that I felt that way. Because the truth of the matter is that we were rich. We really were. In that small apartment, there was so much love and food and family. All of my needs were met on time and in full. And there was always enough to share and to spare. And I share that with you today because that is what today's gospel is all about. It's all about abbondanza. The multiplication of the loaves and the fish is probably one of Jesus' most famous miracles. In fact, it is the only miracle of Jesus's that is told in all four Gospels. So obviously the early Christian writers must have felt this is a key teaching of Jesus's, and it is. As we just heard, 5,000 people are gathered around Jesus, and the apostles are panicked. We don't have enough food to feed everybody. They look at the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and they see lack. Jesus, however, sees abundance. It's the same thing he saw in his very first miracle. If you remember, Jesus' very first miracle was the wedding feast at Cana. And if you remember, his mother came to him and said, "We ran out of wine. What are we going to do?" Jesus didn't see lack. Jesus saw abundance. And he was able to turn water into wine. We see that throughout the miracles. Where people saw disease, Jesus saw health. Where people saw despair, Jesus saw hope. And where people saw lack, Jesus saw abundance. The title of my homily today is Bountiful Eyes. And it comes from Proverbs 22 that says, "One who has bountiful eyes will receive abundant blessings." Jesus had bountiful eyes. The apostles, not so much. They were looking through eyes of lack. Jesus was looking through eyes of abundance, and therefore he was able to work miracles. Now, I know that whenever we talk about the miracles of Jesus here, there are always some of you who ask, Are we to take these miracles literally? I mean, did Jesus literally take 5 loaves and 2 fish and feed 5,000 people? Or are we to take it symbolically? Well, we know that the 5 loaves and the 2 fish add up to 7. And I've told you many times before, 7 is the most spiritual number in the Bible. It's symbolic, and it symbolizes a time of spiritual completion. We also know that there were 12 baskets left over, and there are 12 apostles. Maybe what this story is trying to symbolize is that Jesus and the apostles were able to spiritually feed people, nourish them with their words and teachings. Well, regardless of whether you understand it literally or symbolically, it doesn't really matter, because this story is teaching us the spiritual law of abundance. That's what Jesus came to teach. Remember, Jesus was a teacher. That's why they called him rabbi. That's what rabbi means. It means teacher. And Jesus came to teach us spiritual laws and spiritual principles, not so that we would worship him, but so that we would apply those laws and principles in our own lives and work miracles ourselves. That's why Jesus said, all of the things that I have done, you can do. So what did he do in this story? He took what he had been given, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he gave thanks for it. And he was able to increase it, so much so that there were leftovers. Jesus was able to work that miracle through that spiritual law. And he said we could do it too. Now, I know that there are many people who are critical, and maybe rightly so, of these megachurch televangelists who are preaching what's become known as the prosperity gospel, in which they tell people God wants you to be rich. Well, I will tell you this, and you may be surprised to hear me say it, but Jesus did come to teach us prosperity principles. He did. In Jesus' own words, he said, I have come so that you may have life and have it abundantly. That's why he said he came, to teach us that. But Jesus wasn't talking about money. I know a lot of people with a lot of money, and they are not prosperous people. On the other hand, I know people with very little money who lead very prosperous lives. Because as we heard this morning in our words of integration, it doesn't have anything to do with money. The word prosperous comes from a Latin root word, which means to go forward with hope. You're a prosperous person when you go through life with hope and with trust that God is the source of your supply. God has an abundant supply that never runs out. When you live with that attitude, you are truly prosperous. But many people I know don't live that way. They don't live with that attitude. Jesus did. Jesus lived with a kingdom consciousness. Jesus said, it is God's great pleasure to give you the kingdom. Jesus was trying to say, you are sons and daughters of royalty. Why are you living in lack? God is dangling the keys of the kingdom in front of you. They're yours for the taking. But most people choose not to live in the kingdom. They choose to live in another place. I've told you about this place before. They choose to live in a city. And the name of the city is Scare. Scare City. People who live in scarcity, Scare City, they live in a place of fear and worry and anxiety and lack and limitation. I know a lot of people with money who live in Scare City because it has nothing to do with money. As Eric Butterworth said in our words of integration this morning, abundance is not a condition. Abundance is an attitude. It's a consciousness. It's a way of thinking. Jesus lived with that kingdom consciousness. So where is the kingdom? Jesus told you. He said the kingdom is within you. Jesus lived from that place, not outer conditions. He lived from that place, the kingdom. He tapped into that power. He tuned into that vibration. That's why he told us, seek ye first the kingdom, and everything else will be added to you as well. Get it? Now, in the epistle this week, the weekly church newsletter, I had two quotes about abundance. One was from the late Dr. Wayne Dyer, and he said, abundance is not something we acquire. Abundance is something we tune into. And the other quote was from Eckhart Tolle, who said, acknowledging the good that you already have in your life is the foundation for all abundance. That's what Jesus did in this gospel. He took what he had been given, and it said, he gave thanks for it. That's the activating agent to abundance, is gratitude. Now, you may have heard this phrase, thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. So when you are thinking thoughts of gratitude all the time, looking around you throughout the day and expressing gratitude, those thoughts produce more things to be grateful for. Conversely, if the thoughts held in your mind are, there'll never be enough, I won't have enough, there's not enough, then that's what will manifest. Because that's how the law works. This law is real. It's just as real as the other laws, like the law of gravity. You don't question the law of gravity, do you? So why do you question these spiritual laws? One of the best books I've read about prosperity consciousness is called The 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity. And it was written by a woman named Edwene Gaines. Edwene was a single mother struggling to pay her bills. And one Sunday at church, her pastor was talking about the prosperity principles of Jesus. And she went up to her pastor afterwards and she said, Pastor, I am a grateful person. I'm always looking around at my blessings and I'm always saying thanks to God. I am a thankful person. Why am I still struggling? And her pastor said, Edwene, do you tithe? Edwene had not been tithing because she lived in scarcity. The thought held in her mind was, I can't give 10% to my church. I won't have enough for me and my daughter. So guess what? There wasn't enough because that was the thought held in her mind. But as Edwene started to grow spiritually, she began to trust and she began to tithe. And she began to shift her thinking from there's not enough to God is the source of my supply. All of my needs are met on time and in full. There's always enough to share and to spare. Today, Edwene is a published author. She owns her own retreat center, and she is paid to travel to churches all over the country to share these prosperity principles. Now, in the 4 years I have been your pastor, I have never talked to you about tithing, not one time. And I'm not going to really talk about it today, other than to let you know it is a biblical, spiritual principle that you can apply in your life. And we have a great example of that at Douglas UCC. The principle is that when you give 10% and you express gratitude and you trust in God's abundant supply, you receive tenfold. Well, 5 years ago at Douglas UCC, there were 20 people sitting here on Sunday. And when they looked around, they didn't see lack. They continued to tithe. They continued to express gratitude to God. They continued to go forward hopefully, which is what prosperity means. And now, 5 years later, we have received tenfold. We have more than 200 members in this church. The spiritual law of abundance works. I would not share that with you if I have not seen the results in my own life. I have applied these principles to my life, and I live such a rich, full, abundant life that sometimes I have to pinch myself. For example, this upcoming week, I, who came from poor, uneducated Italian immigrants, living in that small apartment in Queens above a deli, I this week will be flying first class to Los Angeles. And I will be attending a premiere in Beverly Hills. And that premiere is for a film that was made from a book which was written by me. Now, I don't tell you this to give glory to me. I tell you this to give glory to God. And I give glory to my grandparents who on the boat from Italy to Ellis Island believed in God's abundant supply. They went forward hopefully. They believed in something greater. And they said, grazie, thank you, and abbondanza, bountiful eyes. That's what it means to have kingdom consciousness, God consciousness. When you establish yourself firmly in God consciousness, you put yourself smack dab in the middle of the flow of abundance. That's just how it works. God has this ever-increasing, abundant supply that never runs out. You can place yourself right there by doing what? By looking around you and expressing gratitude. By not living in scarcity, but living with trust and hope. That's what it means to lead a prosperous life. So this week I would like you to go forth with bountiful eyes, to see God's abundance all around you, and to say thank you for it. And then get ready. Get ready to receive your good, because your good is on its way. For it is God's great pleasure to give you the kingdom. Namaste.